Good morning and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. Donald Trump set the tone for his presidency just moments after taking the oath of office. His vision brought a mix of cheers and protests. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts gave Mr. Trump the oath of office. After some handshakes, the new president addressed the nation and promised an era of change.
From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
President Trump also promised his administration would transfer power from Washington back to the American people. Reaction has been mixed, largely along party lines. One day before President Trump took the oath of office, his nominee for Energy Secretary went on the hot seat in Washington. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry took questions from senators about his qualifications and his positions on issues like nuclear security and climate change. But a lighter moment may have had the biggest impression. Senator John Cornyn kicked off the hearing with warm words for his friend Rick Perry.
Rick Perry is not a status quo kind of guy. He's a leader. He's an innovator.
If confirmed, I will advocate and promote energy in all forms, and that certainly includes our renewables.
But Perry quickly faced a question about things he said in the past.
My past statements made over 5 years ago about abolishing the Department of Energy do not reflect my current thinking. In fact, after being briefed on so many of the vital functions of the Department of Energy, I regret recommending its elimination.
Senator Bernie Sanders asked Perry to clarify his views on climate change.
Senator, I believe the climate is changing. I believe some of it's naturally occurring. I believe some of it is caused by man-made activity. The question is, how do we address it in a thoughtful way that doesn't compromise economic growth?
While he faced tough questions, the most memorable moment was a lighthearted exchange with Senator Al Franken.
Thank you so much for coming into my office. Did you enjoy meeting me?
I hope you were as much fun on that dais as you were on your couch.
Well...
May I rephrase that, sir?
Please, please, please. Oh, my Lord. Oh, my Lord.
Well, I think we found our Saturday Night Live soundbite.
Perry has been criticized for lacking the science background of previous energy secretaries. In the hearing, Perry instead touted his experience managing large organizations and big budgets. For perspective on Perry's nomination and President Trump's inauguration, we turn to our experts. Harold Cook is a Democratic political strategist. James Dickey is the chairman of the Travis County Republican Party. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, so let's dive right into former Governor Perry's nomination for Energy Secretary. How did you think that really went?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. And aside from the fact that I also thought it was hysterically funny, the exchange between him and Senator Franken.
Right.
Look,
that was great.
You know, you can say what you want to about Perry. I have disagreed with him for years on many, if not most issues. But I will say this, he is not an unlikable guy. And I think that hearing went fine for him, frankly. I think the Democrats on the committee, which is not the majority of the committee, they may disagree with Perry on a lot of things too. But I think they left their personally liking Rick Perry with some glints of what we in Texas have known for a long time, which you know, love him or hate him, he gets along with people, and that's part of the job. Now, as far as, you know, his knowledge about the Department of Energy, you know, the New York Times came out with an article the other day saying that he didn't even know that the Department of Energy takes, you know, primary care of the nuclear stockpile and nuclear research and all that. I frankly, you know, have my questions about the story. I mean, he has been a longstanding governor of a major state. He has been in government since the earth cooled. I find it impossible to believe that he didn't know that, especially when low-level nuclear waste dumps had been considered for Texas while Perry was governor, handled by the Department of Energy. So I think Perry probably knows more than his detractors, of which I am usually one, accuse him of. And frankly, I think we need another Texan in the cabinet, especially now that we know that we're not going to get the ag commissioner.
And I'm so glad you brought up that story from the New York Times, because it was literally the only quote in the entire story was from a transition staffer who left the transition a month before Perry was even nominated. Yeah, it was very odd for the New York Times to run a story that took two authors and had one quote from somebody who wasn't a reasonable source. It was really serious reaching, and I think that's one of the big risks is, as people who are opposed to Perry and Trump from a philosophical standpoint, if they're not careful, they're going to ruin their own reputation trying to go after on completely baseless stuff. But the question of whether someone should be head of the energy department because they don't have a physics degree, I think most of us who've spent any time in the real world have learned that it's not the best teacher who makes the best superintendent. It's not the best plumber who makes the best business owner. It's not the best physicist who makes the best energy department head. There are tons of responsibilities for the secretary of any cabinet position that have nothing to do with the actual expertise carried out by the people who staff that department. And so that whole line of argument just really has no basis.
So he's going to have a new job probably, and now we've got another guy who's about to start a big job, President Trump. What did you think about the inauguration?
Well, you know, it was interesting. His inauguration speech was absolutely fascinating, and to me, it sounded like two people wrote the speech. There were a big swaths of that speech in which Trump, in his very direct and blunt way, because Trump is Trump and he's never not going to be Trump. But in his direct way was using words of unification, words that included all Americans, and then there were the other parts of the speech which were borrowed from his campaign stump speech, which were not unifying messages, and in my view unnecessary, and this in the context that Donald Trump is entering the White House under very difficult circumstances. He is not a popular president, but I will say this. I hope, with some level of skepticism, that Trump ends up being a unifying president. I hope he settles down and stops dividing Americans. And I think a large percentage, maybe most Americans, agree with that. And I think they don't know what he's going to do. I think they're fearful for what he might do, and who can blame them? This is a guy who did many, many things during the course of this campaign that would have been considered disqualifying events to anybody else except, somebody whose name is Donald Trump. So, yes, I mean, I think most people came away from that pretty much like I did, hoping for the best, fearing for worse than that, and maybe the truth ultimately comes out somewhere in the middle.
Unification is going to be a challenge, though, when you've got so many leaders that were boycotting the inauguration ceremony itself. You're from Texas.
Yeah, that's been my frustration. I mean, everybody has free speech. Everybody absolutely has the ability to do what they think is the right thing, to say what they want to say. Peaceful protest, peaceful opposition, and most of the folks involved have done that. And I hope the folks who are not doing peaceful things that gets taken care of very quickly. But yeah, it's hard to figure out how there will be compromise and work together and cooperation when the beginning of the conversation, day one, before you've actually done anything, is I'm going to blow stuff up because you're you're just so beyond the pale I can't even talk to you. Well, then okay, then I won't talk to you. And it seems really frustrating. There were three things I really liked in the speech. The first was I liked that he thanked President and Michelle Obama for their help during the transition, and that he recognized how wonderful the peaceful transfer of power is, and our tradition of that is in the country. So I appreciated that. I liked that he recognized that the United States is unique in the breadth, and he referred to the contrast and the comparison and the things we have in common between the kid in Detroit and the kid in the plains of Nebraska. Right? That was a great image. And at the end, how he said that truthfully, there is nothing we can't do if we do work together, and if we if we have a clear goal and we work towards it. Those were inspiring, optimistic, hopeful things, and I do hope he does it. It seemed like, you said you wish it was a little less campaign-like. I've heard the same from others. But if it's a first step on the transition, for him, it's the first official, I'm not campaigning anymore in any way. This is now me moving into governing. It's not a bad, it was a good first step that way. And so if it is the start of a trend, then that is fantastic.
Can I offer a silver lining here? I mean, it is a little odd for the Democrat at this table to be the one offering a silver lining, but I will say this, and this gives me a little hope for what you were talking about, working together instead of mowing people down or failing to achieve anything. There are two people in this equation who are a lot better acquainted with each other than the general public realizes, and that is Donald Trump, the new president, and Chuck Schumer, the new Democratic leader in the United States Senate. Schumer is the senator from New York. Trump, back when he was a Democrat, was a big Schumer supporter. They are well acquainted. They have worked together in many ways, in many fronts, on many things. I would like to think, just not being Democrat or anti-Republican or just being American, I would like to think we could return to the days of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, where they might bash each other's brains in all day long, but they'd meet for a drink at night and they'd cut the deal and things would move forward. I would like to think that that is possible in this day and age. And if I'm right, and it is possible, it will probably be led by people like Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump, and the fact that they know each other and they're known entities to each other.
Well, and Schumer being invited to speak, that doesn't happen without the president's approval. And so, that signal of including someone from the opposition, someone high up from the opposition, in the events, a lot of people were questioning why that happened, but it could be a very canny political move. To show a willingness to occasionally to work together when we can, when we agree.
Okay, you two sit tight. We'll catch up with you a little bit later in the program. Corruption and abuse of her office. Those are now the charges against State Representative Donna Dukes. We'll look closer at what's next after her indictment. Plus, Central Texas lawmakers gain new power and influence. Find out who could help influence which bills move forward at the ledge. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick announced his pick of lawmakers to lead committees in the Texas Senate. That's important because those committees help decide which bills get brought up for votes. Of the 14 committees, only 2 will be led by Democrats, same as last session. Lieutenant Governor also changed the makeup of several committees. For example, he removed 2 Democrats from the Education Committee, replacing them with senators more friendly to his school choice proposals. But he only made one change to the people assigned to lead those Senate committees. Brenham Republican Lois Kolkhorst will lead the Administration Committee, which oversees things like Senate payroll and office space. She's the first woman to lead that committee. 2 other senators from Central Texas will continue their roles as committee chairs. Georgetown Republican Charles Schwertner leads the Health and Human Services Committee. Donna Campbell chairs the Committee on Veterans Affairs and Border Security. She's a Republican from New Braunfels. Both Campbell and Schwertner are doctors. Newly elected Don Buckingham is the 3rd doctor in the Senate. The Lakeway Republican will serve on 4 committees, including Health and Human Services, Higher Education, and Nominations. Austin Democrat Kirk Watson is the vice chair for nominations. He'll also serve on Finance, Health and Human Services, and Higher Education.
I do not intend at all to allow anyone to get me distracted.
An Austin lawmaker faces a huge distraction just 1 week into the session. We'll look closer at what's next after the indictment of Donna Dukes. Corruption and abuse of her office. Those are now the charges against State Representative Donna Dukes. The Travis County grand jury handed up indictments against the Austin Democrat, including 13 counts of tampering with a governmental record based on false entries of travel vouchers, and 2 indictments of abuse of official capacity by a public servant, a misdemeanor. Prosecutors say she converted campaign funds into personal use. Dukes told reporters she'll fight the charges. Phil Prazen has the details.
Flanked by both their lawyers, Representative Dukes gave a brief statement saying she's not guilty and will continue her role as state lawmaker.
People who are underserved, who do not have a voice, deserve to have my voice in the House.
District Attorney Margaret Moore told me Dukes backed out of a deal to resign. Showing up the first day for her 12th term is what brought on the indictment. In a statement, the DA says Dukes' corruption charges could lead to 28 years in jail. She's accused of abusing her state travel reimbursements and converting campaign funds for personal use. Here's the district attorney last week.
Anyone who abuses the public trust, I think people want to see held accountable.
There's no sign that Dukes will resign. While no lawmaker has publicly defended her, Speaker of the Texas House, Joe Straus, told me this case is between Dukes, the district attorney, and the people of her East Austin district.
That I haven't been briefed on it. There's a process, and I just don't have a comment about that.
Her lawyers say they'll prove her innocent in the coming months.
Now, when this goes to a trial by jury, the jury will hear Donna Dukes' side.
Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
Dukes faces a trial by jury in the 450th District Court. Her first court appearance could be as soon as March 9th. And for perspective on Dukes' indictment and the issues before Texas lawmakers, we turn back to our experts. Harold Cook is a Democratic political strategist. James Dickey is the chairman of the Travis County Republican Party. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks.
So how will Dukes' indictment really affect what's going on in the legislature? Will there be any drama? Will there be any doubt in what she's doing?
Well, I'm not sure there's going to be much difference between her being indicted and her not being indicted in the legislature. I mean, this is a woman who's faced health problems for a while. She was not on the floor of the Texas House of Representatives very much last session either. And whether or not she's there much this session, I frankly, personally have my doubts. I mean, she will either continue with the same health problems or be preparing her legal defense with her lawyers or something. But, you know, with the exception of some items on the Appropriations Committee with respect to Health and Human Services and Children, and in the Appropriations Bill, the state budget, she didn't really have much of an impact last session because she wasn't there.
Mm-hmm. What does it say, you know, her being a Democrat? Often, you know, conservatives say that law enforcement, like here in Travis County, is beating up on Republicans with Rick Perry's indictment and, you know, Ken Paxton's indictment. What does it say? It's on the other side of the aisle now.
Well, I do have to say it is kind of a strange feeling to see a Travis County DA actually enforcing a pretty obvious, huge 15-count set of things done illegally by someone who's not a Republican. It has to be frustrating for the people in her district. During the race, she said she was going to step down the minute after she got sworn in, which was just an obvious ploy for extra tenure and a higher, higher retirement benefit. And that's just, I mean, everything she has done, but everything claimed in the indictments, everything that she's done since the investigation became public, has just been the worst of what people fear about politicians. Insider dealing, you know, using power for her own benefit. It is a safely Democrat seat. I would love to see the people of the district get a real change in representation. But no matter what happens, the people of that district deserve to not have an indicted representative sitting there.
Well, I am a constituent in that district, have been since before Donna Dukes was elected. Well, small correction, the Travis County DA did not indict Rick Perry. The Travis County DA recused herself from that situation, right. And it was a special prosecutor who led that prosecution. And frankly, I didn't think much of it at the time, and obviously the courts agreed eventually. Look, I'm not going to call for Donna Dukes to resign. I also haven't called for Ken Paxton to resign. Indictments are not convictions, and I trust the process to work. I will say this, however. If you, as a Democrat, called for Ken Paxton to resign but are not calling for Donna Dukes to resign, you're acting hypocritical. And if you, as a Republican, are calling for Donna Dukes to resign but did not call for Ken Paxton to resign, you too are acting hypocritical. I think people ought to let the process work. Now, as far as frustration with the district, I agree. I'm frustrated. I didn't have anybody representing me on the floor of the House last session. For what seemed to me to be understandable reasons. She'd been in a terrible car wreck and had health problems. It is increasingly possible that I won't have anybody representing me on the floor of the House this session. That was also possible back last fall when Donna Dukes said she was going to resign. I think a lot of people Yes, it's a Democratic district. She probably would have been reelected on the strength of straight Democratic ticket voting. But there were a lot of people who went out and voted for Donna Dukes, not because it's Donna Dukes, but because they were promised a special election, and voting for her was a way to get to that special election. Now that she's reneged on that, I sense a lot more frustration in the district as a result of it.
We got just about a minute. Does something like this, when you have so many Democrats in Travis County, and he said it's a securely Democratic district, does it give Republicans a real chance to swoop in next election and maybe make a foothold in that district?
Obviously, I would hope so. I would hope that as voters make a real choice for the first time in 20 years, that they consider all the options. We have fantastic candidates who live in that district, who run in that district, and I hope, I mean, Gabriel Nela was our candidate last time, and I know he would have done a great job representing the constituents in that district, all of the constituents in that district. And I think it's unfortunate that he's not right now sitting in the House, and all of the Donna Dukes distraction could be somewhere else.
Well, we will see how it plays out. Thank you both for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. Stay tuned for Meet the Press coming up at 9. I'm Josh Hinkle. Have a great day.